This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Thank you for joining me for the conclusion of my talk with Lindsey Reames, the Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. We've been talking about her 30 years of working in the affordable housing industry. And on the subject of your experience, Lindsey, I'd love to get into why you made the jump from working at HUD and serving as the deputy to the deputy assistant secretary to now running the Grand Rapids Housing Commission.
Yeah, so the decision to leave HUD was not an easy one. You obviously build lots of personal and professional relationships. You have a sense of accomplishment and understanding of why you do this. So it was a really tough decision, but it was also heavily weighed by some personal issues around, travel and being home more. I have aging parents like many of us who are at this point in our lives. I just started to think, is there something else? What's my next challenge? Do I feel like I've accomplished everything I can accomplish here? And so I really started to have this, and of course it was during the pandemic. So we were all, isolating. And I really started to have this soul searching of what is it that I could do locally to impact housing in the community. And it just so happens that I was having a conversation with a former HUD colleague as well, who had some insight into the Housing Commission. And I happened to just casually say, hey, when's the former executive director, he's talked about retiring for 5 years. He's got to be close. And it was just a fluke conversation. And the response was, well, actually, he is retiring in the next week or so, right? And so I just started to think, right, is this something that I really have an interest in doing? And so it all worked out, and I made the decision to sort of jump to the other side. I will say that it wasn't a huge transition for me because for the last 20 years at HUD, I've really mostly worked with initiatives around the recovery of troubled and at-risk PHAs. So those who are familiar with the HUD world know that I spent a lot of time as an executive director, a board chair, or a HUD recovery administrator for those agencies that we've taken into temporary possession due to whether it was deficiencies around governance or physical condition or operations, financial. And so I have spent the last 20 years really working on the ground in day-to-day operations at housing authorities all over the country, including New Orleans, Detroit, Miami, Virgin Islands, Gary. And right before I left, our team was in New York working with that monitorship. So the jump for me on the other side wasn't, as far as day-to-day operations of a PHA, was not as difficult. I would say what was more difficult was coming to an agency assuming that everything was great. Grand Rapids Housing Commission, had a great reputation. They had great initiatives and great programs, but had also begun to suffer a little bit with operations as it related, especially related to the pandemic, right? We weren't doing a lot of interaction with the clients that we served. And so I think I was more surprised by the level of work that goes into day-to-day operations at a PHA post-pandemic. Mm-hmm. I will say that one of the things that I really learned, that regardless of which side you're on, and fortunate for me, I have lots of great relationships, both in the housing industry outside of HUD and within HUD. So I think that makes my job easier. I always know who to go to, what resource there is who could answer a question that I might be struggling with or just need to, seek some additional feedback on. But regardless of which side you're on, what I've learned is that it is critical that we work collaboratively. And that always starts with good listening and a willingness to think outside the box. So that whole getting to yes outcome, I think is where I've really learned, okay, so this isn't something that's normally been done, but can it be done? And how can we do it? Keeping in mind that we need to figure out how to do it without compromising our ethics or making sure that we're not violating anything that requires a certain level of compliance. So that's kind of, how I've transitioned. I am so grateful and thankful for my time at HUD, but also have been very excited and reinvigorated with the opportunities that have happened on the ground here locally.
Knowing your past experience and then just hearing you describe it, are there red flags or maybe best practices that you've gleaned that you would want to tell housing authorities now to say, don't forget XYZ?
So I would say there's a couple that come to mind. And I would say don't become passive when you're operating well.
Okay.
When you're designated a high performer, that's not the time to let your guard down. That actually is the time to raise them even higher, right? And to think about, now I've kind of mastered this, or we're in a good place now. Where else do I go to continue to enhance the lives of the people that we serve and to put the agency in a better place to do more things, whether that's financially or staff driven operationally. So I see quite often agencies who get to that place and then they just become comfortable. What I've seen in the industry, both on both sides, is that, and I'll use the Housing Choice Voucher program as an example. You can operate for a number of years under the radar at what you think is a very high level. But that program in particular, when you fall off the cliff, you take a nosedive hard, fast. And so letting your guard down, potentially leads to some times of uncertainty and surprise. So always making sure that you're developing, I call them dashboards here, that you need to make to monitor the outcomes, to make sure that you're tracking all of those key indicators. So I think that's really important is, and on both sides of the house, right? On your asset management side, as well as your housing choice voucher side. The other thing that I think is really critical is that whole saying, right? Like there's never a dumb question. And we always think that's sort of funny, but it's true. And so making sure that you're asking your peers, your colleagues, others in the industry, right? Sharing best practices, talking about what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and why. And when they face challenges, how do they overcome those adversities? And, just really making sure that that networking mechanism is in place. And third, I think, which is also really important, which is very easy to do because we know what comes out of our state agencies, what comes out of HUD, what comes out of other government entities that we're working with on a regular basis are lots of pieces of information. So the regulations, the notices, the notice of funding availabilities, all of that stuff, making sure that you're staying on top of that and not letting your guard down and missing something from a compliance perspective.
Those are all really good ones. And I couldn't pass this opportunity up. Speaking of staying on top of regulations, do you want to comment on Inspire and HOTMA as it's coming down the pipeline? Do you dare to comment on that?
So I will say that I think HOTMA provides us with some great opportunities. Now, it's true that there's a lot of criticism around the length of time that it often takes HUD to provide final guidance or regulations on stuff that appropriation language and things like that, where Congress has sort of mandated some changes. And it's very easy to be critical on either side of delays or disagreements. But I often try to emphasize to folks is, until you walk in those shoes, you don't really fully understand all the challenges. It's difficult right now because everything seems to be coming all at once, which anyone who follows the industry is aware of. The major industry groups have collaborated with a letter to HUD, kind of outlining the challenges for PHAs to implement everything all at one time. I think that HUD does their very best to get the work done. There are just so many factors that we don't really know about. And that happens both at the HUD level. You've got DC-based staff and you have field-based staff. And it's so easy to be critical if you're in the field of headquarters, and so critical, so easy to be critical of the field if you're in headquarters. And so I have had an opportunity to be in both places multiple times throughout my career. And so often when that happens, you say, oh, I think it's time for a detail to headquarters, right? I think everyone should experience both sides. And that's also the case at the local level at a housing commission. So I have an asset management team who handles our day-to-day operations at our owned and managed properties. And then I have our housing choice voucher program staff. And it's so easy, again, for each of them to point fingers and to think that their work is harder than the others. And the best way for anyone to fully comprehend the challenges that each face is to send them to the opposite place for a period of time. And I call those stretch assignments or developmental assignments. I sort of have this reputation of when that word sort of enters my mouth, there could be a group of, or exits my mouth, there could be a group of 10 of us talking, and suddenly everyone's gone except for the person I was talking to. So yeah, I think this too shall pass. It's all intended to get us to a better place. So just trying to bear with the timelines, the crunches, and understanding each other's roles and responsibilities, I think we'll get there.
It's a little difficult to have such a regulatory overhaul coming out of what so many properties just experienced, where they were having to be more than, housing authorities and property managements. They were doing all of these supplemental resident services and just making sure that people were well and had access to services, but then also the big push for leasing. So it's kind of like everything all at once, regulation changes, like after this huge monumental effort the last 3 years, timed with new vouchers, timed with extra leasing, timed with tight markets. And no wonder our industry right now is just, their eyes are all googly right now as they're trying to juggle all of this. So definitely a common theme throughout the industry. But like you said, we're disseminating what it is, what it means. Several draft versions were out there, so we've known it was coming, and just kind of implementing it in a planned type of dynamic. I know that there's some requests to kind of have this phased in a little differently, so everybody's tracking to see what's going to happen on that as well. Speaking of compliance, and really, performance, what we've been talking about here, anything specific that you have really overcome while you've been at Grand Rapids here that you kind of looked at it as a hard obstacle and you said, wow, okay, this is more than the day-to-day overcoming. Anything you want to share with us, how you've overcome and looked on the other side of this to say, yeah, we did this?
I think some of our biggest challenges are still to come. So one of the, I think, focuses for me was just updating policies and procedures, making sure that, we were in compliance with procurement, with conflicts of interest, with, anything that may not have been updated in our admin or ACOP plans. And that is a significant workload for staff, as you said, trying to re-engage our customer base and get back to normalcy, not just with the work life, but with their family lives as well. Their kids are back in school, they're back to being physically in the office. And so it has been a heavy lift for us the last couple years. I also will say that I'm appreciative of staff, because despite 30 years, I still have lots of energy and ideas for how we do things better or do more. And so they've been very patient. And I often say, well, next week's going to slow down, right? Or next month, we just got to get through this. And next month's going to be a lull time. And they all look at me and roll their eyes and like, no.
Yeah.
You will find something else for us to do. But one of our biggest challenges we've done some repositioning of our public housing assets. 2 family sites have been completely demolished and rebuilt since 2015 and converted to RAD. We do still have one site. It's 188 units. It's about 55 years old. So the systems are starting to fail. I don't think the way the building's built, that rehab is really an option. And so we are in the throes now of exploring options for repositioning that asset. The units it's about 188 units. The units are only about 330 square feet. It's a community that serves some seniors, but mostly disabled. And many disabled with mental health challenges. And so, and here's where everything sort of connects. I think that we could verify obsolescence with the Section 18 demolition application to HUD. And that's the easy part. The hard part is I can't risk HUD approval and the issuance of 188 vouchers for me to begin right away and to help those 188 individuals find units in the community. I don't have 188 one-bedroom units available in Grand Rapids for them to find. And given their vulnerability, I would be contributing to the homeless challenges here in Grand Rapids. So our challenge is not just a plan to demolish and rebuild. That's easy. Finding the funding may be a little bit more challenging, but just making sure that we're considering the well-being of that population is what weighs more heavily on us as a challenge. And so we first have to step back and say, who can we partner with? Who's building new units to maybe transfer assistance or to house some of these families? Can we build something new? Can we acquire a extended stay hotel that's for sale in the area as a temporary measure to accelerate demolition and rebuild and get them back to the property in a shorter period of time? So that's one of our major challenges right now, is just really working through the repositioning of that asset. On the HCV side, we're really focused on assisting more families. And again, that's a challenge because you only have so many units. So we're really exploring and reaching out to our other affordable housing, and not even affordable housing, some of our market rate housing communities, and really encouraging consideration of project-based vouchering some of the units. So those are some of, I think, the challenges for Grand Rapids that we're really focused on.
It was announced a few months ago that Grand Rapids was among one of 18 other housing authorities across the U.S. to pilot an asset building cohort to HUD's Moving to Work program. How is that coming along?
As part of the asset building cohort for our MTW designation, we opted to put forth a agency developed program versus one of the standard options under that cohort. And we tried to think about how do we impact whole households? So not just the head of household, but how do we impact whole households. So we have developed our asset building program as a savings account program. And we are going to start with a small number. We're going to start with just 25 families, but we are going to deposit, and we'll select them randomly, but we're going to deposit into their account $50, a savings account, $50 every single month for 2 years. But we're not going to stop there. So we've also added a match component. So besides that $50 a month for 2 years, we are going to match anything they deposit themselves up to an additional $1,000 a year. So when we were putting this together, we said, so how else can we impact the household? Yes, that's potentially an emergency fund that doesn't put them in a situation of, do I pay my rent or fix my car this month so I can keep getting to work? So we added a component to any household who selected to participate in this. We will also open savings accounts for up to 3 youth in that household between the ages of 13 and 18 with an automatic deposit to their savings account as well, and a match component. Now we're going to put less dollars, $25 a month in each of their accounts, and the match component is up to $500 a year. But such a great opportunity for the head of household to model this behavior, but then also to let the youth practice behaviors that take them into adulthood. So we're really excited about it and anxious to get started. So that's our asset building program. And then, we have some other flexibilities that we're asking HUD to implement in our first year.
Do you have early data or projections or predictions on how you think this is going to play out and how you're going to be able to demonstrate success?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've said to staff from conception is, whatever we design, we need to design something that is going to allow us to measure outcomes, right? I don't want us to be 2 years from now saying, well, what impact did it really have? And us not shrugging our shoulders and saying, well, we really don't know. So we're actually designing those outcomes now. And we'll do some surveying. We're working with HUD's research team to make sure that we're identifying outcomes that are measurable. But I think one of the things that we want to do, because we have a PHA design program, we're not necessarily required to have a control group. But again, we have way more than 25 families at our site. So being able to survey families who didn't participate to know what sort of housing crises they've had and how difficult it was to overcome those versus potentially the savings account families who had this emergency fund to address some of those crises. So more to come on what those outcomes can be, but I really feel confident that we are going to see some positive outcomes and impact. And I think back often to Matthew Desmond's book on Evicted and following those families and that cycle of once it starts, it never ends. So really looking at this as an opportunity to end that cycle for some of our program participants.
Well, we look forward to hearing the success stories on not just this as, a program, but the individual lives impacted. So I know that this will be a best practice shared amongst many. We've been talking with Lindsey Reames, the Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Housing Commission. Lindsey, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom. It has been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you very much. It was a great talk. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.